take it off the screen. I want again to welcome my colleague Eric. I will turn things over to you, my friend, and thank you for the work that you're doing. And let's just open your mic so we can hear you. There we go.
I'm just waiting for this bar to go from across my face. Good evening, everybody. It's Eric Matheson. I have the privilege of serving as the Chief Financial Officer with the General Counsel Office. And I'm a church treasurer and trustee myself. And I started down this path trying to think of ways to make life easier for folks in that role. So there's just a remarkably quick changing environment. I was just saying to Steve and some of the folks here earlier that the last changes and updates to our information tonight came through at about 6 o'clock. And I'm literally waiting on some feedback from major accounting firms and so on around our interpretation of what was said today. So it's a very crazy time, and we're going to give you as much information as we had today, recognizing that Bill Morneau only announced stuff at 2 o'clock this afternoon. So what we'll do is we'll pull up the slide deck now, and we'll go through some of that, and happy to take questions at any time, but I expect you'll have some at the end as well. And please understand that we will not have all the answers for you. So this is the second of what probably is going to be a weekly update around congregational finance during a pandemic. There's no operational manual for that, I can tell you. So next slide.
And, sure. And the next slide is one that I inserted, Eric.
There we are.
I did do it with your permission.
Indeed.
Actually, at your suggestion. Last week, we opened our time together with the moderator, who had wonderful and important ways to connect us as a church. What a remarkable ministry he's been offering to the church. And so Eric asked if we could do that again. So let's just take a minute and listen to the greetings that he brings to us all as we gather around this important topic. Oops.
Hello, everyone. I'm really glad that you've been able to come together for this gathering with Eric Matheson. My name is Richard Bott. I'm moderator of the United Church, and I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for the work that you've been doing in your communities of faith to try and help them get through this time as we're dealing with COVID-19. I realize that there is a great deal happening that's changing from day to day, and I do know that Eric has a great deal of information to be able to share with you. My hope is that in the coming days and weeks, we'll be able to find ways of supporting one another in this time together. So thank you very much. God be with you.
Thank you for that. And if we hit this twice, I start all my treasurer sessions off with the creed, because the financial folks sometimes want to jump straight to the numbers, and there's no more important time than ever to remind everyone that we are really called to be the church right now. We're called to be the church in a lot of new ways. The behaviors that our prime ministers and our municipal leaders and our provincial leaders are calling us for are things that the church thinks to do every day. Love your neighbor, drop off some groceries, check in on someone. That's being church. And if anything else, if there's any silver lining in any of this, it's that some folks are thinking of others and trying to live that way. Next slide. So I had a headwind slide that talked about the business continuity and cash crunch and various things last week. So now I've gone to some mixed bag here of literary references on just how much things have changed. And we're certainly not in Kansas anymore. And everything we're talking about is about breaking on through to the other side. I was going to try to insert some music, but that's beyond my skill set. And, you know, I don't know if in a United Church broadcast one should be quoting the Pope, but we are all Easter people here. And that's what we're trying to figure out. And of course, you see my perspective. The photo there is a bit childish, but it is from happier times when I was able to go to Barcelona. And apparently I can't do that for a while. So with that, we'll move to the next slide. So all the decisions that every congregation, every region, the general council office is wrestling with is a bunch of unknowns around how long will this last, what will the lasting impact be, but also how will I make payroll this month in April? And then you balance that against this being a time where it isn't Sunday morning worship that we can deliver in the usual way, but people are looking for support and encouragement and care more than ever from our ministers and from our staff teams. And I dare say our voice is even more important right now, reminding people of those that aren't under in a nice warm house right now with a solid roof over their heads like I am. So the whole thing that we're wrestling with is, what is it to be church in this time when you know, a straight business decision might say, we've closed the doors already, let's, you know, save every dollar. Or any other way to look at it is, how can we do our ministry in this incredibly challenging environment? So that's sort of the speech part. And now we'll move into, you know, more technical elements. There are folks talking about laying off staff, and I, as a treasurer myself, I completely understand that, you know, you always want value for dollar, and gee, the night custodian can't even go into the building now, let alone, you know, so why are we continuing? The part of it is being church. Part of it is, you know, if we qualify for some of this funding that the government is talking about, part of it's, you know, being a citizen and maybe even modeling the behavior of accepting some short-term pain for long-term gain, and maybe being able to say, what did we do during the height of the fear and the panic? What did the United Church do? So what we're saying to anyone who is in that situation of contemplating layoffs, and it is a very real consideration, is, have you accessed the government programs fully now that we're learning about them? Have you done everything you can in terms of resources, whether it's local resources within your own walls and financial statement, or whether it's within your region? And the part that keeps me going is that at all levels, the church has never moved this fast. There are decisions being taken in days and weeks that would have taken months of committees reviewing and debating, and now it's sort of all hands on deck. So next slide, please. So what we're going to cover tonight is what we know about federal emergency supports, and there's a lot more we know today than we did yesterday. And a whole brand new program was even announced on last Friday, and we didn't know whether it applied to charities or not. At the same time, the General Council Executive met over the weekend. Now, they happened to be meeting over the weekend anyway, but they were able to deal with one of the largest financial decisions probably in the history of the church in terms of freeing up resources to direct to supporting our ministries. So there's still some details to figure out, and we'll talk about that tonight. We'll remind people about how we could be saving cash already. We spoke to that a little bit last week, and we've got some specific actions to recommend. I want to stress, though, that even at 6 o'clock tonight, when Bill Morneau was being interviewed on the CBC, he was giving out additional information about just how long this would take. Stuff that wasn't covered in the press conference at 3:30 this afternoon. So not that I'm trying to build an audience, but more next week. Next slide, please. So there's no question that with the announcements on Friday, and then affirming on Monday that the supply to charities, and then adding some business rules, that we've been thrown a lifeline. It may or may not apply to everybody, and that's one of the question marks, and I'll share with you just now. And if you keep seeing messages about keep checking back, I apologize, but that's just the way it is right now. Next slide, please. So on March 18th, there was an announcement about a 10% wage subsidy. It was going to last 3 months. And the big discussion point last Wednesday, 7 days ago, was how are we going to do this? How are we going to get up to $1,375 per employee, up to a total of $25,000? How's that going to work? And do we have to file something? And can ADP do it? So, okay, you sent me away with a task, and I found out that yes, in fact, ADP could do this 100% on our behalf. We could authorize it, and that was going to be one load off your mind. But now I'm not 100% sure that program even exists. There's a fair bit of debate in the professional community. To the best of our knowledge, it does, but it might be superseded with Parliament being called back. So I'm going to speak to that in just a little bit. But right now, our understanding is that the big 75% program supersedes. You can't have both, but if you aren't eligible for the 75% program, there's a possibility, and as the legislation reads today, that you could still fall back and get this thing that ADP could process for you. So I wonder if that sounds confusing, but I'm going to just work through a few slides and humor me, and then we could come back to that point. So on March 25th, the first of the the emergency response benefit this is for people who lose income by for whatever reason related to COVID-19. March 30th, which was just Friday, announced two very significant elements: this wage subsidy of 75% and the $40,000 loan program. Now, on April 1st, a lot of clarification this afternoon. It's one or the other on the wage subsidy. The 10% wage subsidy, we're looking for confirmation that it applies, but you can't have both. If you happen to qualify for the 75%, obviously that's the one you take. And if you don't, then there is, we think, a fallback to the lesser one. Okay, and I see I just answered a question for Chuck, so I'll keep moving to the next slide, please. So let's a few of the details. And if you watch TV, you'll see it on news feeds. You can check. This isn't overly new. This is what they've been promising for. It was originally small employers. Now it's everybody. 75% of eligible salary for up to 3 months. This is retroactive to March 15th through June 15th. And it's worth the $847 per employee, et cetera, et cetera. What we've heard now is that it's going to take a while to set up. They're hoping to have people be able to apply maybe next week, as early as next week, and the money to flow probably in about 6 weeks. 3 to 6 is what he said most recently, Morneau. Obviously they'd like it to be 3, but they're hedging their bets. So this is after the fact money. You would have needed to make payroll before this money comes back your way. A key element in all of this, and new, is this threshold that's been announced, this 30% threshold revenue loss. Next slide. So the revenue loss thing makes sense. If you think of forget church for a second, but if you look at any small business that's had to close and that relies on sales, its revenue has gone more or less to zero. But if you picked, I'm going to exaggerate to make my point. If your church had no rental income, no investments, and 100% of your people on par, if people didn't go off par, you would have no revenue loss whatsoever, and you wouldn't qualify for this. So the rules that were announced this afternoon, with all kinds of question and confusion around how to measure them, is that the idea would be that you compare to prior year. You compare March 2020 versus 2019, and similarly in April and in May. You have to reapply each time. These are things that are, this sounds like a pain, doesn't it? And it will be, because most of us don't even spend a lot of time comparing our month to month, certainly not in the early months of the year, but hopefully an accounting system would give you this kind of printout to have a look. It's an open question right now whether investment income, and in particular unrealized gains, would factor into this, because obviously everyone with investments got hammered in March, and there would be nothing to discuss. But the bottom line is there's going to be an online portal, 6 weeks to pay, and there's a potential for a liberal interpretation of that. But it will apply to lots of churches that have significant rental or other event income, dinners, and so on. And if you're 100% donations, your donations might be falling off a bit with COVID-19, but you might not meet this threshold.
So Eric, before you carry on, questions coming in about contract staff. Some people are paying some of their staff through ADP, and other staff are on an hourly wage and they're paid through the church. Which staff qualify, which ones don't? Can you say a little word about that?
Sure. So this is one where basically it's going to be payroll records, payroll where you're taking source deductions and potentially withholding tax, income tax, that drive the wage subsidies, and that's true of either one, the 10% or the 75. This does take us into a space where if folks have been paying people off payroll, and whenever I say that, I mean no source deductions, those jobs won't count. Okay, where those jobs are picked up in terms of relief is not to the church itself or to the employer itself, but through the emergency response layoff benefits, where there's actually it can be anything from a choir member to a treasurer to a part-time person who isn't on benefits.
And those would be monies the government pays directly to those persons, but not through us.
Yeah, that's correct. They would if those people lose their employment, they're picked up by the emergency response benefit.
Okay, so next question. Hillhurst United Church has been budgeting and counting on fundraising events or programs or campaigns. Are budgeted fundraising losses considered to be revenue loss?
That's a good question. I think the answer to that would be we will argue yes, but it would still potentially be trapped by the year-over-year comparison. So if you have a budgeted event, say for mid-April, then you're going to have to wait till the end of April to see how that compared to prior year. So budget by itself is not enough. It needs to be what your actual revenues were.
Yeah. And so Linda Irvin is asking, an hourly contract staff with deductions, the 75% applies. It's hourly contract staff who are self-contractors that we don't do deductions for, that 75% doesn't apply.
If it's on the payroll that's reported and summarized by ADP or otherwise, it's not the payroll provider that's the issue. If you're filing with the CRA with a payroll account, that will be the numbers they look at.
Okay, thanks. There are some other questions which aren't quite applicable to this slide, so I'm going to hold them. I haven't lost them. and we'll come back to them, but I'll let you carry on now, Eric. Thanks.
Great. Okay, next slide. So there's just a couple of technical elements which might factor into the arithmetic here, but there is a cap on the eligible salary at $58,700. I'm not going to read these numbers exactly, but basically there's a maximum subsidy of $847 a week, which is a 75% of $58,700. So that does mean that if you look at the comprehensive salary of our more senior ministers, there will be a portion of salary that isn't picked up by this formula. It is, however, much richer or more beneficial than what anyone would get on employment insurance. Now, today, the Morneau said at least twice, and I think Trudeau did too, that there's this whole thing is intended to be an incentive to keep people on the payroll, and they said that businesses, I'll use the word businesses, needed to be able to certify that they were making every effort to top up the salaries completely. So to me, that means that in the extreme, there will be some businesses that elect not to pay their staff other than what is rebated back. And I'm not laughing at that. I'm just saying that's a very sort of callous way of looking at it. And they're literally being asked to certify that every effort has been made. And I'm going to go to the next slide because it just ties in with this last point. I think it does.
Okay, because I have a question to pull you back to when you're done.
Sure. Oh, and we can double back. Okay, so these are two quotes from the Prime Minister, and I'm a financial person, and I always tell treasurers you have to do what you have to do, but make sure you're never carrying that decision yourself. It has to be the whole board, and in this case, you might even want to do electronic consult with the congregation before doing anything untoward. I'm going to read these ones. We are trusting you to do the right thing. If you have the means to pay the remaining 25% that's not covered by the subsidy, please do so. Now, at a church level, I'm taking that as a pretty absolute goal. My local congregation, and I don't think we're going to have the conversation about that difference. If you're going to accept a subsidy of that magnitude, then you want to be the most decent, caring employer you could be. And then there's the little veiled threat here. And if you think this is a system you can take advantage of or gain, don't. So, Steve, back to you for questions.
Yeah, okay. So when you were talking about the distinction between contract employees and people on payroll, Philip on YouTube said, so that's the difference between people who get a T4A and people who get a T4. I thought, if that's right, that's a really quick and dirty way for treasurers to understand the distinction.
That's a useful distinction, and that further assumes that everybody who isn't on payroll gets a T4A, but basically it's everybody who doesn't get a T4.
Everyone who doesn't get a T4 is not on payroll.
Is not on the payroll summary, yes.
Right.
And Clyde, I hope, is nodding his head.
He seems to be, yeah. He's got his mic muted, but he's looking happy. Anybody who gets a T4 is eligible for that 75%. That's a really quick and dirty way to make the distinction. Thank you.
Yeah, remember though that it isn't them getting it, it's the employer getting it while that individual continues to get all or most of their paycheck and stays on the payroll. The incentive here is to maintain employment as opposed to laying people off.
So a couple of questions. Oh my goodness, some of this is really, really detailed, and I don't know that we can get into the weeds too much, partly because the weeds are changing as we speak. But questions here about what is considered a donation. We've got a church with a food bank that's funded by designated donations. They're not available to regular church income. So can they exclude these donations from their church income to calculate the income drop?
Almost certainly not. At the end of the day, the kind of revenue that's going to be measured, absent, people making a special appeal or something, is going to be accounting revenue. So that would be all donations. That would be rental income. That would be the wild card is for churches the extent to which investment income, and in particular now investment loss, counts. But we don't get to when we're doing assessment, for example, we say that if you raise money for outward purposes, we don't assess for that. The CRA makes no distinction here.
Okay, thank you. There's a question here about this slide, the second bullet. Can you work us through that one again? How does 847 become 1129? That's not clear to the YouTube person.
Well, to be honest, I haven't checked the math. That's a cut and paste from the government.
Okay. So
but,
the 847 is 75% of the 1129. Is that what you're trying to say here?
Yeah.
Thank you. I think that, but just walk through that again for the YouTube person to make sure that we're clear, if you please.
Basically, well, the way I'm going to understand it, and I haven't checked the math because I literally did cut and paste it, is that if you make 58,700, the government and you meet the threshold test, the government is going to give you 3/4 of that.
So there's questions here about income that is grants, income that is designated for a specific purpose. How does all that factor into sort of the general income that's available to the employer?
Well, it's revenue. I mean, at this point, the government hasn't made any distinction, and in fact, a grant of any kind is miscellaneous or other revenue in our context. A donation from a government perspective doesn't matter what it's for. It's for the quote unquote charitable use of the enterprise, and even a bequest could throw this off. Like right now, there's no, I'm just thinking out loud here, but if you got a bequest this month, it could make you ineligible for this wage subsidy because of the high level accounting that is being done here. And I'm not raising that as a justice issue or anything. I'm just saying that when you try to have a sweeping program designed over a weekend by the brightest minds in the country, it's not going to cover the complexity of United Church fund accounting.
Yeah. These are really important questions. There's so much detail here. Clyde, I know you're reading it too. Is there anything here in the weeds that we need to get into, or should we let Eric go on and give us the high level picture?
I think would be best to keep going at this point. We'll try and come back to questions if they're not answered later.
Okay, that's kind of my reading of it too, folks. The specific details of how it's going to apply in your congregation, you'll probably learn as it unrolls in the next 2 or 3 weeks. What Eric can give us today is the high level picture that the government is announcing and his take on how that's likely to have an impact on us. But the very fine details just aren't quite there yet. And that's frustrating for all of us, especially for those of us who are money people and want to know every cent. It's not going to be quite there yet. Stay tuned.
However, and let me say that I don't think it's ever going to be either. In terms of the church type of accounting, let me just say that a bequest is monthly revenue from a pure accounting point of view, and will skew your results. A government grant coming in that came in maybe you'll have stuff that happened last year and doesn't happen this year, and you don't really your donations are the same, but something happened last year which suddenly makes you eligible for this grant. Right now, churches run at such a tight, aspiring to break even level that you'll have to take the good with the bad on how this formula works. So I hope that's not too discouraging. Let's move to the next slide. And
just one quick comment, if I can, Eric, before we move on. I've heard of churches where they've got grants, and the grant is meant for a project that goes over the fiscal year. And I would suggest that you break down that grant so that it's properly accounted for in the fiscal years. And that way you brings your revenue stream down a little bit for the current year.
Right. Well, that could work. Most churches don't do deferred revenue accounting, as you know, but I think if you have unusual circumstances, ask. Okay, and at the end of the day, I think there's a limit. I don't think there's too much trouble a church can get into, just given our revenue streams and so on, when you're testing your qualifications. So if you have a bequest, if you have a grant, if you have something that you think is unfair, check with your region or email to Clyde, myself. We'll have a look at it.
Sure. So is this going to be done on a month-by-month basis? So you test March's revenue and April's revenue and June's revenue, or are they going to look at total revenue for 2020? How are they going to judge the 30% drop?
No,
Or do they know yet?
No, well, they've said that they will do the test each month. So it is March to March, April to April, or more correctly, March 15th to, you can get into partial months and how that's going to work, okay? So they haven't got it nailed down, but it is going to be 3 separate applications for a very significant chunk of cash. I mean, think of it, 75% of your payroll is typically your biggest expense. You want them to have some due diligence on this, as a taxpayer.
Sure. And
So,
if my church takes money out of its reserve fund to make sure we can meet payroll, that's not considered revenue. That's just money we've taken from one of our own pockets to another.
that's absolutely correct. All the internal transfer stuff that we do as we report to each other in our committees and all that stuff, that is irrelevant from the perspective of this program. They're looking at it from an overall accounting perspective.
Great. And what about a multi-point charge where you've got different charges with different revenues and so on? Would they look at the big picture for the whole pastoral charge or mission unit or whatever it is we're calling it now?
Well, that's where it gets muddy again. The short answer is it depends where the charity is. Some multi-point charges hold charitable status at the charge level. More common in my experience is that it's held at the individual point level. The good news is that you then qualify for this granting. It doesn't max out. Each of the points can make a claim if they're eligible, but they'll have to divvy up and they'll have to look at what they file under T3010. That's going to be a factor too, because they already have to split their revenue that way.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Again, I think we're getting into a fair amount of detail, and maybe we should keep getting the big level picture because I'm conscious of the time here too.
Right. Okay, so this next one, if it works the way everyone understands it might, and there's an if statement there, and I'll just say if it works. This is one that I'm going to encourage for every single charity, every church, every outreach ministry, to apply for a $40,000 interest-free loan that has a kicker. This is to help with cash flow. And it has a kicker where if you repay it within the 12 months, $10,000 of it is forgivable. This is the one that literally could make the difference for a lot of folks. Morneau again clarified at 6 o'clock on CBC that he's been talking to the banks. This is going to take about 3 weeks for the banks to be fully set up and so on. I have already gone to my own church's banker and said, I want one of these. I don't care if it's set up. I don't care what. I want one. And
so it's your opinion that churches will qualify. We are considered not-for-profits. It doesn't say charities. It doesn't say churches.
No,
you're not going to be excluded by this.
No, a not-for-profit is a broader category for charity. A charity by definition is not-for-profit. So we're good.
Okay.
So this is huge.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So next. So this is now for people who, and I haven't spent as much time on this, and I really won't be able to answer too many questions about who's eligible and how and stuff. those might be for church employees, those might be questions to your region pastoral relations ministers and so on. And we have to get more information. But the idea of this benefit is that it's available basically to anybody who isn't getting paid as a result of COVID-19. That could mean that they're still on the job and they're not getting paid. That could mean they had a small part-time job and they were laid off. It could mean that they were laid off and they weren't eligible for EI. And the only sticky rule, this is almost like a short-term guaranteed income program, because if you, say earned and declared, okay, very important, declared over 5,000 in income in 2019, then as I understand it, it's not prorated or anything. You're eligible for 2,000 a month for, I guess it's 3 months or 4 months, whichever it is.
4 months.
Yeah, thank you. So this is, if we do have to consider layoffs somewhere, you can draw some solace in the fact that this is a benefit that can kick in quickly, which is the reason it was developed. The employment insurance system, which frankly didn't cover all that many people anyway, was completely swamped. So if you have to go that route, there's some solace in the fact that there's a relatively quick response vehicle. Okay. Next slide.
Before you go on, let me just circle back for a question. People on YouTube are asking, did you really mean December 31, 2022? Do we really have 2 years to repay this back?
I have cut and pasted that again. So I believe so. Now they have said 12 months as well. So we'll see what it is. But here's the thing. There's a church program too that I'll be talking about in a second. And we would be very committed to making sure that every church did pay off that loan within the time frame to take advantage of the loan forgiveness.
Thank you. Sorry, go ahead, Nick.
Okay, now here's a couple of things. I always try to use provocative titles. What you should do now, okay? And I'm going to qualify it because I presented to some folks in BC this afternoon, and folks were trying it literally during the webinar, and so, which is great. No, we need to be action oriented. So first of all, I've already said this. Tell your bank you want to apply. Okay, you should be going to your bank anyway for an existing line of credit to increase it if you need to do that to make payroll. You should be going to them for a line of credit that, and if they're hesitant, don't want to give it to you, you can try saying that the National United Church of Canada will guarantee it. Okay, you get to say that. We will guarantee a line of credit that you intend to pay off locally, but sometimes a guarantee makes a difference between that being offered to you or not. Okay, so now we did learn today that we think that might be 3 weeks out or so before banks are actually able to do this. But the idea is that they're going to do it on an expedited basis. They shouldn't be asking you for any history or anything. You could actually be a pretty crappy credit risk. It's 100%, no, it's 100% guaranteed. So the bank should just be pumping them out the door. And of course, they're also negotiating with the government around, capital provisions and all that kind of stuff that Andy Spears knows way more about than I do. So we're still saying, can we avoid layoffs? As a church, I'm saying we should try to do that. As a treasurer, I have to say, well, maybe we can't every time. But that's aim to cover the April payroll locally if you can, okay? And then get prepared to apply for the wage subsidy as soon as it becomes available. So that means getting the data. That means getting your March. I mean, you should be able to figure out in the next few days, or you could maybe figure out what your March year-over-year data looks like. It's just if you're on an automated accounting system like Sage or any accounting system, it's a standard report. So get ready, figure out if you're eligible for the 75% or not. Okay, because if you are, you want to have assembled, you want to have learned what it is they want, They haven't told us yet. And you want to be ready to fire that in. And the minister today announced that, you know, on the first day they open up on the internet, they want people from like with names from A to E and then from F to, you know, J or whatever. They're literally going to have rules to try to have this fair entry point so they're not swamped. I mean, in some ways it's a throwback to the way we used to do things long ago. Now, here's the one that got me in trouble this afternoon, and I'll have some information for it. Everyone here, or every congregation should do two things. They should set up an online capability, an account with Service Canada, and I'll include a link for how to do that. That's so you can, if you do ever have to do layoffs, you can do it in the fastest way possible to support your employee. And get them a record of employment in the fastest possible way. If you can't, there's a snail mail, you know, iterative way that happens with ADP, but it's slower. And I'm suggesting that if you do have to make this difficult decision, you'll want to do it in the most supportive way possible. And then the other one,
I can tell people, because they're already asking, that the link that you put at the end of this slide deck, I also added as a direct link from the recording page for this webinar, so people can click the link there and get it right away.
Yeah, it's coming up in a second anyway, folks. And then the charity business account, it's the same thing where Mr. Monroe said today that about half the businesses, and that presumably means the charities too, are registered with the, you know, an electronic version of the My Account that you might have for your own tax. You should do that. It's a pain. And Clyde, just this evening, about an hour ago, agreed to whip up a quick how-to webinar. This is the kind of stuff that he does for a number of clients and helps handholds others to do it for themselves. So we're going to have a webinar shortly, probably just a recorded one rather than one you have to you know, sign on and on how to do that, because we literally had people trying to do it during my afternoon session today in BC. Next slide, please.
So yeah, before we go, questions about this loan thing. If we're going to apply for a loan, what about board approval? What about region approval? What about you know, the whole church process?
Well, for this one, and I haven't discussed this with the regions, I'm meeting with the region executive ministers to put together all kinds of protocols on Friday. But having said that, if this is an interest-free loan and you need to make payroll, I can tell you though any of those things will happen fast. It is a good idea to have the board agree to it, at least by email, if nothing else. And I can tell you the regions will be supporting this in any case.
Thanks.
These are different times. We're not having the conversation about are you encumbering the asset and will you be able to repay. Right now, we want you to make payroll. We want to do everything possible to come out the other side, and then we'll have conversations about you know, the usual, you know, perhaps more measured approval process. Okay, so again, this is news here, and the United Church Emergency Response. So every region is trying to do what it can. There are varying degrees of financial capacity. There are regions that will have a degree of financial capacity. They might have their own loan programs. And I know that several regions, for example, have relaxed access to MANCE funds. So there's a whole bunch of detail that to the extent it exists already will be on region websites, and you'll see it on our website as soon as it firms up. Now, on Saturday, the General Council Executive approved the creation and basically in support in principle for a very far-reaching emergency loans program. And it's to provide support through this crisis and get us through it. The church doesn't, you know, there's details being worked out about exactly how to apply for it. What, you know, it'll be in cooperation with the region. but everything is based on it having as simple and timely access to funds as possible. Now these are, and to give you an idea, I'm currently negotiating to get the largest loan in the history of the United Church to serve as a backstop for funding our congregations during this unprecedented time. Concurrently, the foundation has made the largest grant in its history to the United Church to support this work at this unprecedented time. There'll be some press releases or some official communication, but the church is stepping up in a big way. I'm going to go to the next slide, and I anticipate there'll be more questions. And I did notice that Chuck Heron had noted just today, in Ontario, and we're speaking to the whole country, of course, but Ontario represents 40% of our charges. Ontario's announced, very relaxed rules for annual meetings and governance meetings to make it easier. And the United Church has some rules and guidelines for that as well, which you can check on. I think they're online or will be very, very soon. So this program of ours, okay, it's intended to supplement the federal stuff, okay? The first call is the federal funding programs. They're intended to be short-term transitional, and if we aren't utilizing them, then we aren't. Well, frankly, we're reducing our chances of coming out the other side, because the national church, no part of the church has the financial capacity to cover payrolls indefinitely or help bridge things. So this loan program in the short run is for quite unique special case intervention. Okay, the assumption is that we too will have an interest-free loan program that will extend beyond the government program. The region will work with whoever needs to avail themselves of this, and not all congregations do. And and the amounts, it won't be one of these normal church programs where it's some standard amount or anything. It has to be based on bridging the revenue stream for what would otherwise be a successful or a financially sustainable congregation. Next slide. So in terms of cash management, okay, we talked about this last time, but we got a whole bunch of new people on here. The first thing that you can manage for cash is pushing out your assessment payments. I've had maybe 20 or 30 communities of faith so far request to move off of pre-authorized payment of their assessment to improve their cash position. If you have a quarterly payment due on your assessment, if your annual payment hasn't been paid yet, don't pay it. Okay, it's not a huge cash item, but every little bit helps. Okay. However, while that's happening, that same assessment is a significant contribution to the national balance sheet that we're already leveraging. So we do anticipate having to pick that up somehow down the road. But right now, we're all trying to conserve cash and get more access to credit. Many camps and congregations who have loans with the national church have asked to have their loan repayments suspended. If you ask, it's automatic. If you don't ask, the assumption needs to be that you're okay for the time being. And I want to stress that we're in the business of mission and service, and that money, we grant that out before it comes in. So again, that's another situation where the financial statement or the balance sheet of the national church is supporting the normal operation of the church, and now we're leveraging it. And you know what? The finance committee of the general council, executive, the executive itself, these are folks that took on this decision Frankly, at the finance committee level, where normally you would have the most debate, it was unanimous that we needed to do this for the health of our congregations. So we're doing the same thing the government is. We're taking on debt as a body to support each other. So next slide, please. And I see some questions, or
Yeah, so
let me see if there's a
one
lot.
question. I got a whole host of questions, but there's one that pertains to exactly this slide, and that is, oh my God, my congregation sent you a bunch of post-dated checks. How do we stop you from cashing them?
Just tell us who you are and when you want them stopped. And let me say that it's too late for April 1.
April Fool? No. Yeah, no, I get it. But yes, thank you. So yeah, I'll hold the rest of the questions and let you finish with this, and then we'll circle back to some of the ones that have come up.
And let me say one more thing. We want to avoid, if at all possible, reversal type transactions. And that's just because of the amount of work it creates. We have people working remotely and going in a couple of times a week to pick up mail, and various things we're trying to do to keep things going. But creating marginal transactions, like, if there's a $250 payment that went through last month, I'm asking you not to ask for it back. I'm not saying no. I'm asking you not to ask me.
There's only so many hours in the day, and you don't have a huge staff. I get it. Okay, since you're talking about those kinds of things, what about mission and service payments? People collect them as they're given, but can they just hold on to them and send them to you in September? And similarly, does the government consider those to be income to the church, or is it just pass through that we're giving and it's income to you?
Because they're a local donation, they are income to the church.
Okay.
That's point number one. Secondly, I'm going to give you the legal answer, which is it is money collected in trust for a designated use. And I'm talking now about donor designated gifts.
Mm-hmm.
And so technically it should be passed on. But I don't know, like many different churches have many different patterns on when they remit. So all I'm going to say there is it wouldn't surprise me if for pressing cash needs, someone did what you suggested and waited till September. Some churches remit monthly, some remit quarterly, some remit a couple of times a year. And I would love to have it all come in monthly, but right now circumstances are extraordinary and people will do what they need to do. But you do need to get it in the year it was gifted.
The difference between you and me is that I'm not an accountant. I'm a minister, and you're a finance guy, and we always argue, don't we? That's part of the fun.
I've said as much as I can say on that.
I heard exactly what you said, and I'm grateful. I'll hold the rest of the questions, and you can carry on.
So this is intended to be a rough guide right now. Okay, hierarchy of support, hierarchy of needs. It's sort of church finance Maslow is what I'm playing with here. The first thing to go on, the surest thing, to the best of our knowledge, is this federal interest-free loan. This is the guaranteed $40,000. The federal wage subsidy, if you're eligible, okay? If you haven't applied for that, and you're eligible, you really shouldn't be coming to stretch the balance sheet of the region or the national church further. We really need to use all the tools in the toolbox within your own church. Okay, if there are investments to cash in, you have to at least look at that. There could be a compelling reason not to, but it shouldn't just be because the trustees want to see what you can get elsewhere. Okay, it should be something like you're locked into a bond that has a penalty or something. Obtaining or increasing a local line of credit is a great thing to do. And again, I've talked about the guarantee aspect. If you do bounce a payroll, there is a safeguard that the ministers and staff get paid. Basically, what happens is you're penalized $125, which in the scheme of things you might think of as immaterial, but it is also has to be remedied with ADP and the region within 3 days. Rather than create that kind of stuff, what we're saying is, if you anticipate anything like that, reach out to the region in advance instead of letting it happen. And we're hoping that this will be relatively rare. But even before this crisis, it did happen, and there was a mechanism for dealing with it. Okay, next slide, and you folks can keep feeding me questions. So I'm just gonna, so we're called to be the church, okay? I don't know where different people on this call are on their views around layoffs and what the church could be doing, both as an employer and even as serving their community in these odd ways that you can do it with, you know, Zoom and all, you know, there's touch-based calls. Steve had worship between 6 and 6:30 tonight. We're still seeking to be a community and reach out to others as the regulations allow. If you are going to feel that you're forced to do layoffs, then let's do it in a way that speeds the benefit and is the most sensitive to those impacted. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the record of employment here. Next slide. Oops, sorry. Yeah, I thought that was a different one. Okay, so just a reminder, we've talked about these already: saving cash, moratorium on loan payments, assessment. If paying your insurance annually, request a mode change. And one of the challenges we have is the insurance industry is one that is in a state of huge flux, and there are premium increases coming. So I'm lobbying right now for saying, I understand that, you know, this might be the best deal I can get from a premium perspective, but can we stretch it out somehow in terms of how it impacts our congregations? Next slide.
Before you go on, Eric, I just want to make one comment on some that I've heard about the insurance. A couple of the churches wanted to know if they could just stop paying their insurance premium. And that is not wise.
No, there may be, the worst thing you can ever have happen as a trustee is to not pay your insurance and then have something huge happen, because frankly, you're into personal liability, and yes, there might be some directors and officers coverage, but that's so basic that it's just a fundamental fiduciary duty.
Yeah.
So listed a couple of items there. I think I've got an insurance slide up next, which isn't what you signed on for tonight, but just so you know, lots of little things. Insurance for empty buildings. You know, you don't, normally there's really strict rules around that because they're abandoned and they're higher risk. As long as someone's checking in there to make sure the doors are locked and that the pipes haven't frozen and broken, limited visiting is okay, because that's what our governors are asking us to do when we close buildings. I want to stress there's lots of questions around business interruption insurance. When I say very unlikely, let me say I think the chance is 0 for churches. There's debate going on in the industry, but the only possibility that I see is potentially there's a clause that camps have that at least you can start to argue for a claim, but business insurance is not set up for a pandemic, and it's a big debate topic in the insurance world, and that's boring. So next topic is good. You know, there are other things. There's no data overages, and there's various data timeframes and so on. And if the insurance company does give us, say, 60 or 90 days to pay, and by the way, I've asked for 90, then you can do that. But whatever they say the due date is, unless it changes, that's one you want to keep in force. Next slide. It's getting darker here, affecting my lighting. Anyway, in any case, sustaining revenue, not really going to talk about that tonight, other than we spent a fair bit of time on it with David Armour's team on a couple of webinars last week. We will have some best practices on the website around everything from e-payments to PAR to Canada Helps, and generally trying to think of ways to have payments, have payments continue to come in. Again, we'll link some of that information to the national site, and you should look for it on region sites as well. One new piece of information, we've established a dedicated fax line for PAR bank changes or PAR new additions. We don't want that in the mail or email. Well, mail's okay. We don't want that in email because email isn't secure with the type of confidential bank information and signature that's on the forms. So that's mechanics tonight. That's not really why I think anyone joined us, but be aware that that's out there as well. Next slide. So, you know, I could cry with some of the stuff I'm working on, so I try to laugh occasionally. So this slide is called "Let's Get Digital." Digital, no? Okay. So if you, thank you for laughing. If you don't have a record of employment web account, create one. This is the Service Canada stuff. This is so you're expedited to process not just the record of employment, but there's, you know, it will also set you up in the future to potentially apply for some grants and things. The world is going way more online. If you're stuck at home, if you're not an essential worker or out there in the world, you might have time to navigate these sites. This first one isn't that difficult. On the second one, the business account for charities, I've asked Clyde actually to do, this is the one where I had folks in BC doing it during the webinar. With the CRA office closed, I'm not quite sure if it works perfectly, but Clyde's going to do a webinar or a recorded how-to session, and we'll have that up for people so that you can navigate that as well. And that's as much singing as you'll ever hear from me on a church webinar. Next slide. So I think we had these last time too, but we've got lots of new people. So loan guarantees, if you're going to the bank and saying, I'd like a line of credit and my denomination is willing to do it, send those directly to me. And you don't even need to ask permission in advance. You can just tell the bank to send their stuff to me, because unless you're like there's a suspicious number of zeros on the request, I'm just going to rubber stamp it. The deferring monthly withdrawals of assessment, again, you can just request that. That doesn't need a region approval. Neither does the loan guarantee right now. Suspending church loan payments, same thing. However, anything else, when it comes to personnel matters, when it comes to possible region funding, it's a really good idea for all of us to be talking to each other. And then when we get to the church loan program, we'll have more information on that as early as next week. It may take me another week to, I think I need 7 days to call a meeting of the sub-executive and so on, but we're moving way more quickly than the church has, and we think we're trying to do it in a responsible manner. So next slide, I might be winding up around now. Yeah, I'm going to close with this. And this week, I'm actually giving credit to the guy who wrote it. This is a friend of mine in my congregation who's actually studying to be a minister, after a very successful legal career. And I'm going to read it just because I've been doing finance and uncertainty all day, and this gives me some calm. And then we'll open it up to some more questions. God, who is with us now and always, support us and guide us in this time of uncertainty, so we may feel brave and strong to offer kindness to others, in the spirit that these safe interactions are the true dwelling of the holy. In your name we pray. Amen. So I'm here for as long as people want. I think the other thing I'll mention is that I'm hoping that Steve has the ability to print out everything you've written and everything you've asked, and we will review that closely. If your stuff wasn't answered tonight, we will use that as a very key input to our session next week, because we're determined to get you more answers with each passing week. And we're on again next Wednesday, same time, same channel even. And Steve, you're going to close us off, were you, with
Sure, yeah,
One last message?
I'm happy to do that, but let me throw a couple of questions at you first. And I need to say you're looking more and more like the Cheshire Cat all the time.
Oh,
We need to get some more light in your room there, Eric. You're disappearing on us.
it's getting dark here.
I think you just turned off the electricity to conserve payment, right?
Cash flow.
So cash flow, that's it. So questions about the United Church grants. Are they available to incorporated ministries? Are they available to camps? Are they just for congregations? Who the programs that you're unrolling and telling us about? Who gets to apply?
Details on all of that being sorted out. The initial thinking has been congregations specifically, because the revenue model is from congregations for congregations, but we certainly recognize the need. For our outreach ministries and camps are in dire mode as well, and I'm just hoping that they will qualify in a big way for that. In fact, I think they're more likely to qualify in a big way for that 75% rebate too.
Thanks. Getting a lot of kind of very specific questions about certain situations that I'm not sure we can get into tonight. And who would you recommend people talk to if they want regional advice or advice about provincial programs? Are there people in the regions who are equipped to help them?
Well, certainly the region folks are monitoring the provincial programs. I'm aware of a number of provinces adjusting health tax amounts and so on. I'm not overly aware of provincial programs that target churches in particular. It could be where we have specific outreach ministries under the church umbrella. I'm thinking of food banks and warming centers and so on. Those could well qualify as well. But yeah, check with the region and feel free, frankly, to the more email I get, I can't promise a response the way I like to respond, but you can start with me as well, and I will dole them out wherever I can.
Okay. There's all kinds of details that are still fuzzy, and you've admitted that, and that's just a reality of how quickly these things have been unrolled by the feds. How and where will we find out when specific details about how to apply become available for certain things? Can you point us in the right direction?
Well, right now there's no place. They're literally coming out like all the church. The government websites aren't updated because in some cases they need Parliament to come back. But you're definitely going to be looking for. Certainly look at the church websites, but the official stuff will be on the Government of Canada website for each of these programs.
And of course, this is why we're doing these webinars weekly. So before people sign off, and we've lost 100 people already, and that's okay. But please, friends, remember that we're doing an update once a week on Wednesday nights at 7 o'clock Eastern. Make the translation into your own time zone. Eric will have brand new stuff that's hot off the press and get it to me by 6:30 that night, so that we can be as up to date as possible for you week by week as the ground shifts under all of us. Question just about that PAR thing again, just for people who aren't clear. When do we need to send something in the mail about PAR? When can we send an email? What are the rules about that?
Well, an email for amount changes. The key thing is when you have a signature and bank information on a PDF file, if you want to get technical, or an attachment, a photo, it could be anything. Email is not 100% secure, and one of the protocols for PAR is that you want to have the security. So fax, ironically, which I consider to be a prehistoric technology now, is more secure. The fax should be used. The address on the form will work. We also provided an address of an individual, which is just going to be a little faster than mailing to the head office while the head office is closed. I don't have that address at my fingertips, but we'll make sure people have it.
It is available on the General Council website. I saw it there this afternoon.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Anything you're noticing, Clyde, that we need to pick up here?
Just one comment, and that's how will they be notified when I put on the webinar? The webinar I'm going to be doing about applying for your My Business account is going to be a recorded webinar. And I'm sure that information will go out as soon as that recording is ready to be posted.
Sure. So I'll post a copy of that at the recorded webinars page of United in Learning. I'm sure it'll be other places as well. We'll make sure that you get those tools as soon as they're available to you.
Right. And let me say that I think, Clyde, I'm speaking for you here, but we thought recorded might be easier for people rather than trying to schedule one when you're all so busy trying to minister to your communities and so on. If there's a desire to make that a more interactive session, we could do that, but we're just going to pick a time and frankly bang that out. And we thought a recording would be just as useful. So if you have views on that, throw them in the chat box and we'll consider it.
One last thing that Eric asked me to mention, and some of our philanthropy friends have asked for this too, before we lose too many more people. I wanted to acknowledge that in the congregation I serve, there are some people who are losing their paycheck, and their donations are going to drop off because of that. There are also other people in my congregation who are living on a fixed income and it's not changing. And they're writing to me and say, how can I give money? It's okay to let people know what's going on. It's okay to have a stewardship appeal. We've got one coming out from my congregation that will go out by email on Friday morning. And I wanted to share with you just briefly the slide that I used in worship on Sunday. If I can find it while I talk here, there it is. So in the midst of our online worship, we put up this slide after the sermon and before the doxology. And I acknowledge, now there's the name of my church website with our donate page, but I acknowledge these various different tools that are available to our folks for giving. Some of our folks are being very generous. Some of our folks are finding that they have extra money in their family budget because they're not commuting anymore and they're not eating out in restaurants. And some of them are willing to give a little extra so that those who don't have as much can be held over. I'm finding folks, when we're clear about the need, that people are very generous. So we did that in church, and then we sang our doxology together, and it was a lovely time in worship. It was prayerful and appropriate. There's all kinds of different ways we can do online worship, and we're having a webinar tomorrow afternoon in this same space to talk with the worship leaders about how to do online worship. This is something certainly to include in the midst of that. Generosity is part of our spiritual discipline. It's part of our life together. Some of our people will be asking us. I had one elderly lady in my congregation who said to me, I've got 6 envelopes I need to get to the church. And I said to her, well, is there cash in them or is it check? She said, well, it's cash. And I said, take all the cash out, write us 1 check, not 6, and put it in the mail. She never uses electronic stuff, but my goodness, she wanted to make sure we got it. And bless her heart, I'm grateful for that. So that's the life of being a small church minister. And you folks, I'm sure, are dealing with the same things. So don't be ashamed to ask. It's appropriate, and we are doing some of the most important ministry of our lives in this time. People will want to support that as long as we can inspire them with the ministry we're doing. Eric, I'm done my sermon. It's over to you again.
Well, just thank you very much. I do think things will start to firm up. Each Wednesday night right now, we're going to do this for the time being. I think next Wednesday, there'll still be some squishiness from the government, but I think there will ideally have been a website or 2 opened up, and certainly by the week after Easter, I think we're going to have a clearer picture of how the various government processes work, and I dare say how the United Church processes will supplement that. So thank you for everything. Thank you for being church, and we'll keep trying to chase down answers on your behalf.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Somebody is asking me for the information about tomorrow's webinar. So tomorrow at 3:30 Eastern time, same time slot as last week. We met with ministers. This week we're meeting with ministers and anybody else who helps with your worship service and is interested and is available at the time. 3:30 Eastern time. We've got people from across the country who are routinely doing online worship, including a minister of online worship from North Vancouver. This is all she does. We're going to have some conversation together about tips and tricks and things we've learned and the ways we do it the same and the ways that we're all of us doing it differently, because there's no one right way to do it. But we are all learning from each other in this time. I think it's time to draw this to a close. Let me just check the chat one more time. There's a lot of gratitude. There's some very congregational specific questions, which I think are better directed straight in an email to Eric. I will make the chat from both streams, YouTube and Zoom, available to Eric so that he can read through it and see what Clyde and I missed. But I think it's time for us to say goodnight. So thank you. Thank you, Eric and Clyde, for your work. Eric, my goodness, I've never seen you run so hard, and you're a runner.
Was a runner. Thanks, everyone. I confess I'm now heading for an adult beverage. Thanks, all.
I wish you well, and I look forward to seeing everybody next week.
Good night. Thank you.
Blessings to all.